Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome back to another PlayStation 2 Legacy bonus content. It's been a while since I've done one of these, and I figured today we talk about particularly two games that is part of a series that unfortunately hasn't been seen in a long while, actually, in all honesty. What game am I referring to? Monster Rancher. If you don't know, Monster Rancher is essentially sort of like part of the trend of monster catching, except you're not really catching monsters, you're taming them. So it sort of follows a little bit differently, but somewhat similar to that of, like, say, Pokemon, Digimon, something like that, except on the one hand, they don't evolve. Number two, they don't transform, and number three, you're more or less just breeding them, rather than just, say, you know, breed a Pokemon and train them up and stuff like that. This is somewhat different, and the best way to explain it is just for us to dive in and I explain myself as we continue onward. The Monster Rancher series originally started on the PlayStation 1, but for this video's case, we're going to be referring to the PlayStation 2 era, which is Monster Rancher 3 and 4. But first, let's talk about Monster Rancher 3, as I feel like I want to talk about this one, mostly because Monster Rancher 4 has a few extra features that I kind of like better than I do Monster Rancher 3. Monster Rancher 3 is more straightforward in the sense of what all you need to do. Basically, you start off in a forest where basically you use the environment as sort of like its training ground. And you're training monsters to where you can eventually put them into competition to get to the top rank, if you will. Now, of course, there are some small stories that kind of build up while you're training your monster and stuff like that. But overall, the main concept is just to train your monsters. The best way to train them in order to get them higher ranked and everything like that, to where they can be in higher competitions, all the way up to S rank. But even after you get to S rank, you also have to face off against, like, say, the big four, per se. You go through the tournament of each area and you fight off the strongest monster of that area. And yeah, then after you do that, you then fight the big guy itself. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to say this right now. In both Monster Rancher 3 and 4, I have never been able to do that. Why is that? Well, before we get into that, I do want to talk briefly a little bit more in regards to Monster Rancher 3 in terms of what all you're able to do. So first and foremost, yeah, you do train them, but as you continue through the weeks per se, you are able to, say for example, go exploring in the area. You're able to acquire either new skills or enhance your skills. In some other cases, you may be able to find some small items that help boost the stats of your monsters. Now, of course, you can give your monsters certain items that will either help them get through training a little bit better, you know, able to build up their stamina to where that way they can continue training and stuff. But you also have to keep in mind too, you have to feed them every month. Every month you have to feed your monsters to where that way they can continue training and stuff. Now, in some cases, you know, some people will say, oh, well, what happens if you just don't feed them and stuff like that? Well, they're going to be poorly tired, they're going to be very worn out, and they're not going to be able to perform in terms of training as well as they could. So it's always better to just try to feed them every month. And if you're able to, feed them the best nutrient that they can be beneficial to. It's easy for some monsters, but other monsters are a lot harder to feed in terms of what should be better in terms of nutrients and what's better in terms of what they like. So yeah, you have to fight off what food is best for them or what food they prefer. So it's a fighting choice per se in terms of raising your monsters and stuff. Now, before I talk about a little bit more about Monster Rancher 3, let's jump over to Monster Rancher 4, as Monster Rancher 4 has a little bit more in terms of what all you can do. So, for starters, yes, you do raise monsters, but also, too, you're training them in competition, and you're also exploring caves, you're exploring jungles, and all this other stuff. And your exploration of those areas are a lot more faster than vast, or a lot more bigger than what you could do in terms of exploring in your own backyard per se. So what all do you do in terms of exploring in Monster Rancher 4? Well, you're finding treasures that you can turn around and sell for profit. You find stone tablets that you can use in order to either get new training gear or other small things that can help beneficial for your monsters and stuff like that. You can find items that can help enhance your monsters later on in time. So going through these caves and stuff are very beneficial in terms of raising your monster. Now, the game says that it will shorten their lifespan, but overall, you kind of need to if you want to better give your monster better stuff. For example, as you explore the caves and as you're fighting more monsters and stuff like that, you're able to give your monsters more moves that they are used in order to perform in battle, and some of them are actually a lot more stronger. And then, of course, you also give them better abilities to where they can perform better during competitions and stuff. Now, with that being said, the question is, why have I not been able to beat Monster Rancher 3 and 4? Well, for one key opponent in particular, and that is this. Every monster has a lifespan. Now, some people have difference of like how long of a lifespan each monster has and stuff like that. But really, the longest that I've ever had a monster last was anywhere between 3 to 4 years. After the 3 or 4 year mark, by that point in time, they can easily drop anytime they want to. In 3's case, they straight up die. They straight up die. They give you this cinematic feel of the fact that they just straight up die and collapse. And they transform into a heart. And that heart can be used to give to another monster that you're training some of those passive traits. So depending on what traits you've leveled up your monster better in, that monster can go and have those traits to where they can be better performance in terms of combat and stuff like that. In Monster Rancher 4, on the other hand, though, instead of dying, you are forced to put them in retirement, which essentially is a freezing substance where you freeze them, and then later on, if you want to, you can combine them to another monster. Now, of course, depending on how you do this and everything like that, you can have potentially two rank A's, I think, and when you combine them, they become rank C. So essentially they can be fused together to where they can not only have a better performing monster, but also to higher rank, to where instead of having straight off a rank D monster, you have the ability to where you can climb up better ranks and stuff like that. Now, this isn't bad, but again, like I said, this lifespan is a problem. So say, for example, you're trying to train your monster in all stats. Well, that's not going to be possible, technically. You can't train your monsters in all perimeters. You only have to select certain perimeters where you feel like they're going to be the most beneficial. For example, in my personal opinion, your best options in terms of training would be more or less your HP, your defense, your attack, and your accuracy. Or in some cases, your speed in this case. In Monster Rancher 3, in particularly, there's traits such as your HP, your attack, your magic, your defense, as well as your speed. However, though, in Monster Rancher 4, your speed isn't the only thing. You also have accuracy and evasions as well. Now, speed, from what I've read in Monster Rancher 3, also counts for both your evasion as well as your accuracy. So depending on how high your speed is, depends on the likelihood you're going to be able to land an attack in Monster Rancher 3. In Monster Rancher 4, on the other hand, speed, yes, does help in that factor, but there's also accuracy and evasion that also are accountable as well. So they're separate traits outside of the speed parameter that was in Monster Rancher 3. So 4 gives you a lot more options to work around and stuff like that. 3 is more straightforward in a sense, but also compounded in a way. Now, you might be also asking this too. Why am I talking about both of these games in particularly? What sets them apart outside of just being a normal PlayStation 2 game and outside of being just a normal monster training game? Well, one particular thing, and something that isn't featured outside of just either the PlayStation 1 or, for that matter, the PlayStation 2. And that's the gimmick that the game has. Now, this particular gimmick, yes, you do get them inside game, but there's a stone tablet known as a source stone, which contains monster data, and that monster can be resurrected in order to train them however way you feel. Now, you could do that, or, depending on your collection, Look through your library of games and see what monster you can generate. Yes, your physical library becomes an actual encyclopedia for monsters. Now, yes, there's not like over 1,000 different monsters you can get, but there's a good amount of different monsters you could generate from just by having certain titles and stuff of that nature. For example, you have a chance of being able to generate monsters that are designated from certain media. For example, there's a Kasumi Pixie that you can get. There's also a race car looking one that you can get from a Need for Speed title. The samurai looking monster from Oshimusha series. And then of course there's another monster that you can get depending on what game or what movie or whatever CD you get that can generate these monsters and stuff like that. So yes, your entire physical library, whether it's DVDs, CDs, PS1s, or even PS2 for that matter, they will generate monsters, and that includes both 3 and 4. You can generate a random monster just from your physical library. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, well that's cool and all, but what about PlayStation 3, 4, and 5? Do they generate monsters? They technically can, but they're not all going to be different. For example, in Monster Rancher 3, you get this Mochi monster, which is essentially sort of like the main IP character of the series. However, though, in Monster Rancher 4, you get this weird, cryptic-looking plant monster. And this is my theory. This is basically what you call the base monster, meaning that if for some reason a disc is unable to be readable at all, whether because it can't read the disc, or because the disc is a different generation in this case, it will just read it as like a base monster, and it will give you just the basic monster. So that's cool. So it means that doesn't matter what disc you have, it will generate a monster, whether it's the basic monster itself, or it can be any different monster that's available in that particular game, which is really cool in my personal opinion. But of the two Monster Rancher games, which one do I like better? Well, I have to say I like 4 the best, just simply because of the dungeon exploration of it all. In Monster Rancher 3, it's not bad, but it's straightforward in a sense, and it's kind of harder to train your monsters in Monster Rancher 3, I feel like. Monster Rancher 4, depending on what gears you get and what type of equipment you're able to get from the stone tablets and stuff as you're exploring, you are able to better perform and better train your monsters and everything like that. And I feel like it's a lot more organized compared to Monster Rancher 3. Also, too, in Monster Rancher 3, you're only allowed 1 monster out at a time. Yes, you can switch him out and everything like that, but you have to put a monster in slumber before you can get another monster. And you can change them out whenever you want to and stuff like that. This is partially a good way to be able to hang on to a more powerful monster you've trained in the hopes of being able to get them to rank S and so on. But in Monster Rancher 4's case, you can have upwards to 5 monsters out on your ranch, which is really awesome. But this also means that you can take up to 3 monsters during your cave explorations, which is very nice because they can do what you call team attacks. And this also is the same way in terms of being able to enter them into competition. You can enter in so long as they're in the same rank, that is per se. You can enter in tag battles, or in terms of group battles, where it's up to like 3 or 5. But the best way to explain Monster Rancher as a whole is sort of like Harvest Moon, but you're training monsters. It's sort of more simplistic to understand. But while that's all straightforward and everything like that, the question that I'm sure you're probably asking is, why am I talking about Monster Rancher, specifically 3 and 4 and all that stuff? Well, for those that already knew this, or probably didn't even know about this, I didn't know that in the PlayStation 2 library, there actually exists 3 Monster Rancher titles. I've played 3 and 4 in the past. Record, I never beat them, but I did play them in the past. And this 3rd one is Monster Rancher Evo. So next episode, we will be diving into Monster Rancher Evo and checking that out. So stay tuned and watch out for this episode when it drops. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This is BlackCross sign off. Catch you guys later.